hot, so breezes are good. All right, I see a few. I was definitely feeling like not way behind, but like 2 minutes behind today. So I was like, okay, it's gonna be one of these kind of days. Right. I think people will keep jumping in, but let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everybody. Uh-oh.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I believe you said before that you like take notes of what people are saying and you make a spreadsheet of them. Did I mishear?
Yeah.
Okay.
We sometimes post the chat in
Oh, okay.
in the post. What we do is I write a blog post each week.
That's what I was thinking. Sorry.
Yeah. So because this is really an informal support group,
Yeah.
I do a combination of, I do record everything. And if you want a copy of the record, if I didn't post it as part of the post and you want a copy of the recording, or you want a transcript of the chats,
Oh
I'm
no.
happy
I
to.
was just curious about the blog. I wasn't sure where to go to see that.
Yeah. So if you go to our, if you go to our website, I'm going to pull this up. The weekly blog is always on the right-hand side here.
Okay.
So preparing for what might come up was what we discussed last week. But this main story, oops, let's go back there. This main story is about this weekly communication support. And at the bottom, it's mostly just the links so people can get it. But at the bottom is a running list of each theme.
Okay.
And the posts that we've done for each theme. And the posts are a combination of me writing like a written blog. And sometimes it's just me like reposting the audio or reposting the video if I don't have time to like do a big, huge piece.
I gotcha.
All
I
right.
was just curious because I was given your link by my boss, and so I didn't even see the website.
Right. Okay. I'm glad to hear that you got here one way or the other. But this is, yeah. And because we've been doing these a while and I've been sharing tools, there are a lot of tools that I might reference that you're like, what is she talking about? And everybody else is like, oh yeah, I'm using that tool. The links to those tools are all inside these posts.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Appreciate that.
All right. Good morning, everybody. I'm gonna, I'll leave that up there. So, as I was telling folks who are coming in, I don't know about you, but I'm feeling this kind of, Sarah, you described it really well, of the like acceptance phase of the grief cycle, or the like needing to regroup, like a feeling of like, okay, I'm just like, it's no longer like full on nonstop crisis of, like dealing with crisis, but it is, it's still very present, the work that we have to do, and staying on top of everything and juggling everything. But I think this week I've gotten to a point where it's like, okay, we have to keep going, and this is going to be a long haul. So partially we are in that mode because we have to be able to process stuff. But, I really appreciate, Brandy, a couple of weeks ago, you said something on one of our calls about like, if you're going to do this kind of work, you need to kind of be ready for a long haul. And I think that's true of communication work. I think that's true of anti-racism work. I think that's true of the transformative leadership work that we have to all do. So this week's theme was really pretty basic because I created a new tool that I wanted to share with everybody. And it's a lot of what we've been talking about, which is keeping messaging clear and easy to follow. So it's come up a couple times this week as I was talking to folks about writing. And because I write so much, and it's so much part of my life, that I no longer have that like, writing thing that a lot of people have. And I used to, of course, like I think everybody has that. That's why we get forced to write papers when we're in school, and why we had to do entire, theses and dissertations, and because pulling together ideas on paper is on paper, quote unquote, is just one of the most challenging things to do because it really becomes a material item. And so writing and creating a message for a verbal story, like verbal narrative, I've just found a couple of things that have been coming up that I wanted to point out to folks, and then I wanted to share a new tool and then open it up for a conversation. So the first is, it seems like the idea of doing an outline is not something that people continue to do, or were ever taught to do. I've heard that from a couple people, not just one, but like 3 or 4 people. Like, yeah, I was never taught to like do an outline. And maybe it's because I'm old, but like an outline is one of the most important parts of creating any kind of message, which is, what is it that I want to say? Like, what's the idea? First of all, what's the gist? And then how am I gonna weave that together to be something that has a beginning, a middle, and an end? And then I'm going to add to that a call to action, because any of us that are doing any kind of work to try to make the world a better place, we need to be inviting people in to do something. There's got to be some kind of action. So that's the first thing I was thinking about. I was like, oh yeah, outlines. Like when I went to school, I don't know about you all, but we had to do these like really elaborate outlines. And so sometimes when I say outlines to people that had that kind of training, it's like, oh gosh, I got to do the Roman numerals and the A's and the B's, and I don't even remember the structures. That's not really what I mean. I just mean a flow and points. And the tool I'm going to share with you is geared toward that, in that direction. The other thing I just keep hearing that I just want to remind you of is that like sometimes we have to play with words to be able to understand what we're trying to say. I get that. But I think there is a lot of kind of stream of consciousness wordsmithing is what I would call it. So people are like writing stuff and then they're like not fully getting into a stream of consciousness that may actually reveal something really interesting. It's like this weird hybrid of stream of consciousness writing and then like picking at your words while you're going along, which to me seems like a very schizophrenic like recipe for like discomfort. Like the idea of like having a free-flowing narrative and then stopping at a word and being like, "Ooh, that word's not right." That just defeats both purposes. So I want to encourage you to do stream of consciousness, like do an outline and then do stream of consciousness, but then get it down and then wordsmith, then edit those words. And if you are feeling while you're writing that you know a word isn't right, what I do is I circle it, or I like bold it, or I like highlight it in yellow, but I don't try to go to the thesaurus and find that word while I'm in my stream of consciousness. So that's just more of like a tip on a little trick that writers use is they write everything, they write outlines, they write everything out before they start editing, and then they go through many drafts to edit. And then the last thing before I share the tool is like once you get something together, I really want to challenge everybody to go back and cut it down by 25%. Look at your word count. And we all know that we've had to do applications or grant proposals where we've had a limited word count, and that has pushed us to be as clear as possible. Those are really good challenges to have. And I encourage you to kind of like self-inflict that challenge because it's going to push you to come up with like something that is just like more dynamic, more interesting, more clear, which is really the whole idea. So I want to share this tool, and then Megan, I'd love to get some of your thoughts on this too, because you are a writer and an editor, and you've been in the media, and your area is like narrative storytelling and media within Dodge and as a professional and as a person. So I wanted to just share this tool first. So there's a new tool this week, and it is, I'm going to put the link in the chat. Where are you, chat? Okay. So it's called the Message Builder. So this is really focused on core message. So you know how you have like your one-liner, and then you've got like medium size language, like what I would call, what you might hear me call boilerplate language, which is medium length or long length, or kind of like the one pager version of your story. You will never hear me say that you need an elevator pitch. First of all, because I don't think you're pitching anything. You're doing really great, amazing work. And all you really need to be sharing is your inspiration and your purpose and the vision that you have in very crafted ways. But this tool, if you follow that link, you'll get a window that says, do you want to copy this tool? So it'll make it so you can fill it out, so you can use it. But I just want to go through some of the key things about a core message, which is basically that boilerplate language, the way you either talk about it verbally or the way that you write about your organization or your work. So the first thing is the one-line starter. And this is really such an important thing, because it is what I would hope is replacing the like elevator pitch or the like one-liner. I don't know what people call it when they're trying to do sales, but basically it's like a peanut butter cup of, or I'm going to say it's like a truffle, because I like those better, of like every single thing, like butter and chocolate and sugar, like all in one thing that is easy for you to like constantly say in a way that feels real and genuine, not that's like a robot saying it the same way exactly every single time. So the ingredients of a one-line starter are your name, the structure, like what you are that helps people put it into some kind of context, and your purpose. And your purpose is a combination of your audience and the action. So for example, and I've used Social Impact Studios examples throughout this builder to just give you some ideas. So for example, our one-line starter at Social Impact is Social Impact Studios is a creative hub for engaging people in issues and culture. So I'm explaining what we are and what we do, but I'm using some terminology that may be hopefully provocative, that gets people to be like, what is that? So creative hub, that's a made up thing. Everything's made up, but that's a made up thing. Like, I'm not a dentist. I'm not a graphic design. We're not a graphic design studio. We're not a PR agency. We're not using the terms that most people are using to describe what we are doing. And that's intentional. That's to get people to be like, what is a creative hub? First of all, I'm hoping that makes you feel invited into some kind of dynamic activity, that creativity is involved, that it's got some joy and abandon there. Those are my ways that what I hear when I hear creative hub. So I'm intentionally putting that in there as my structure. So when I say structure, it's not like to be boring, it's to be clear and for you to be clear. And then our purpose, which is like the action and the audience, we're engaging people. So that's people's big word, but we're engaging them in issues and culture. And I used to say like important issues and culture, but our name is Social Impact. So if you don't understand kind of what we mean by issues and culture from the word social impact, you may not really either get what we do or care about what we do, or you may want to ask questions. And the number one question I get when I say something like this, well, there's two. One is, what is a creative hub? Which is great. And the other is, oh, what kind of issues? And that's exactly what I want. I want to engage in conversation with people. And my answer to that, when someone says, what kind of issues, then we have another layer of our story, which I'm not including here in the core message, which is we focus on four main categories: opportunity and prosperity, justice and fairness, culture, and well-being. And then that's like, oh, justice, blah, 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 blah. Like it'll interest people in something to keep a conversation going. The next thing that I think is important for this is to go to the need. Most people skip over this, presuming that most people understand what the need is. So when I say issues in culture, I could easily be like, everybody knows what the issues are. So I'm not going to explain what the need is. That is a definite pitfall that most people make. So being explicit about the need in different ways. You can say, we believe, blah, 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 blah. Or you could say, youth need an outlet for after school. Or youth need mentor leaderships. We know this because of these statistics. Or you could say, this is an artist response to what's going on in the world. This is my artist response to the Black Lives Matter movement, something like that. So the example here is at Social Impact, we believe that positive, proactive messages should get more attention than anything else. So I'm laying the groundwork to say, like, we're trying to do something different, but I'm not necessarily saying everything all in one sentence. The next thing that you got to remember is a time reference. A lot of people skip over this too. If it's a new project, don't worry that it sounds like it's not baked yet. That's really exciting for people. Or if it's a new way of looking at your work. So Sarah, I know at the American Craft Council, you all are going through like, I mean, it's already been forever. What is craft? What is it? What do we mean? But right now you're in this like new way of looking at your work. And everybody is. Everybody's doing that. Or if you've been around for 25 years, you want to say that. You want to say, like, we start our little blurb with since 1996, blah, blah, blah. Because somehow in my world, enthusiasm somehow gets equated to youth. And I earned these lines fair and square through a lot of like enthusiastic work. So I'm very sensitive to, and I'm also a really small person, so I'm really sensitive to like making sure people know I've been around for a while, or that we've been around for a while. So all of that may be in your wheelhouse to tell people a time reference. Then who are you and how does it work? Those could be in opposite order. So you could talk about how what you do works, or you could talk about who you are, or you could frame how it works with who you are. So an example of that is, as creative activists, we're removing the barriers for fearless communication and action. That's us telling you who we are and what we're doing. Or Social Impact Studios is a place where creative activists collaborate, learn, and do the work. That's much more like functional. And then how it works is the like nuts and bolts. And keeping that simple is really important. This is where we in the nonprofit public interest sector can really overdo it. We're like, we have this program and we have this program and we do this and we do that, and we do this and we do that. Everything should be substantiating the what you do, not just like we do this, we do this, we do this, we do this. It should all be like upholding, for example, in our work, like upholding, removing the barriers to fearless communication and action. Am I describing what we do that actually does that? Why this approach? So I'm working on this language myself right now, which is being explicit. Since COVID this year, it's been very easy for me to be explicit about what we're really doing social impact. And since everything that's been happening with Black Lives Matter and anti-racism, it's been even easier for me to be like, yeah, we're trying to dismantle this dominant social narrative that's consumer driven. And we're trying to like, upend all of the stuff that makes people feel like they're a commodity. That's what we're really doing. That's what we've always been really doing, but we haven't said it like that. And I also, for our 25th anniversary, we're going to be really, really pushing back out the concept of design for social impact and how design is an act of self-determination and independence and interdependence. And I love your sign that's up on your wall, Megan, about interdependence. And then what is the visionary outcome? Not leaping over that. not leaping over like what you're really like, what the big vision is, and then a call to action. So this, I'd love to recommend that you take whatever your boilerplate language is and like extract it out and put it into these sections and see how it goes, because this can be a really effective flow. So when you're using it as a written bit of information, when you're actually using it, you want to introduce it with an ask. So I'm writing to introduce myself and invite you into this new exciting project, or I'm sharing this with you so you can jump into this exciting work with me. If you're delivering this story verbally, you need to be ready to pause between sections and ask questions. Would you like to hear more? Have you had that experience? How does this overlap with your work or mission? So when you're building your narrative, even for yourself, having these like points where you're like, stop talking, listen, ask a question, it's really key, because we will just get into our own narrative really easily. So that is a tool that you can use for your organizational message, or for a promotion that you're doing, or for a project. And I think the basic beginning, like what concept, beginning, middle, end, action, call to action, is the flow that I think could work for any kind of communication that you're trying to do, a blog post or a letter, anything. So let's open it up, and I'll leave this up here, but let's go ahead and open up for questions or comments. Let me make sure everybody's in. Oh, hang on. Yeah, everybody's in. So how does this resonate with you? What kinds of things is this helpful for? What's missing? Megan, if you want to jump in and talk about any of this, I'd love to get your input on that.
Yeah, thank you. My brain has been like ready since you called my name earlier. I think this is great. So my name's Megan. I am the Communications Director and Informed Communities Program Officer at the Dodge Foundation in New Jersey. I've been at Dodge for about 5 years, and before that, I was a community journalist in New Jersey, covering local, beat reporting that almost doesn't exist anymore. So what was going through my head as you were sharing this is, this is journalism uses the inverted pyramid structure, where you're putting the newsiest, like straight to the point information that people need to know up top, and like going deeper down. And it's a very methodical process, and it's basic. It's what every journalist is doing. There's some problems with journalism. You're bringing your lens and this false sense of objectivity that has really harmed communities, particularly Black and Brown communities. So what I've learned over the past 5 years is, you still use that method, but you bring in, we're lucky, I think, in our work that we get, that we have an objective, and we have good work and values and perspective to bring to this approach. So this is it. Like, there's a part of me that's like, God, it's so simple. I wish it was more complicated. But like this, this would help me be really clear about what am I, trying to say, and getting started when I feel like a schizophrenic writer, because that's often how I approach storytelling or writing. Because it's the inverted pyramid is like ingrained in me. It's like how I see things, but I still just like go through it kind of knowing that I need to like sequence a story in a specific way.
Mm-hmm.
So just having it like that is, I think, really clear. And it is a good base. Like I think you can play after you've gone there.
Yeah.
But you have to see it first.
Yeah. And I think even, a lot of the tools that we've been talking about, like the promotional planning tool or the action planning tool, part of it is knowing what your intention is for like writing. And now this tool was specifically developed because like people are questioning their very identity right now. And so they're writing as if they're like stream of consciousness exploring that questioning, which is good. But I also have witnessed a lot of the statements that everybody's been putting out around Black Lives Matter in particular as being this kind of like inner monologue. Like the organization is almost having its own inner monologue, which I think is good in some forum. And I think that you have to be really careful to not just adopt that as your new like identity statement, that your job as the steward of the organization and the identity, or your own narrative as an artist, that your job is to help make it clear for other people. And that then you may be inviting them into like, how did I figure this out? Or how am I struggling with this? Or what am I still trying to figure out? So even me telling you, looking through that sheet, I was like, I got this, I got that, I got this thing I'm trying to figure out still. Like I'm trying to tell you what my new way of framing design is into self-determination. Like I'm not even sure how to talk about that yet. So I'm doing that with you, but like what's the appropriate forum to do that in? It's not on our like boilerplate language. That needs to be really like confident and clear at whatever stage you are right now. So what did other people get from this tool, or this kind of idea of like just being clear with writing and the flow, like doing an outline and then doing like beginning, middle, end, and call to action? Like, how do you approach your writing, and how is it different, or how is that helpful?
Good morning, everyone. Hey, Ennis.
Hi, Brandy.
I would say for me, a lot of what you said is reinforcement, because that's kind of the flow that I would use. Is just the writing a brief outline, knowing like the key things I want to hit on, and then stream of consciousness, and then just editing.
Mm-hmm.
But what this tool does is we're a new organization. So doesn't mean we're young, but we're new. And for me, it makes me want to go back to revisiting like that whole like one line structure, and see, versus a year ago, does it still fit? Does it still feel the same?
Yeah.
And maybe how to make it more concise, as we really kind of are, developing what we want, to see with our organization and how we function in our community. So that's really what I take away from it.
Mm-hmm. And because your organization intentionally is thinking like the first 5 years is going to all be kind of exploration and really learning and figuring it out. But
Right.
You can't necessarily be in that you can't be talking about it always in that mode for all of those 5 years, right? So
No. It was even with some of the packaging and things that you helped us put together. Was like, well, if we print this, and it's different, down the road, what does that mean? Can we still use it? But one, it definitely shows, how we've grown, and it shows the things that have kind of led us to the point that we're at now. And so it's okay. It's, it's really leaning into knowing it's okay for the language to evolve.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah. And in acknowledging that it probably has evolved, that it just makes me say, it's probably time to go back and visit,
Yeah.
what we were saying and how relevant it is now.
Yeah, and also using adjectives. Like we tend to leap over that. So even like at Social Impact saying like we're a creative hub, like the creative part or the idea of you being explicit about exploring or even like cultivating, because of those are verbs, but like the ideas that you have in your work, making those adjectives or adverbs around the structure can can be a single word that carries a lot of power, um, in a way that you don't have to then like have like a long complicated description. Yeah, I'm excited to look at that. I want to now look back at that one liner and be like, wait, where did we leave that? What do you all say now? What's your one liner now? Like when you just like say what you are.
Well, as you said, it doesn't sound like a robot, when we're speaking about it. It's something different. And it also depends on who we're talking to, of what things we pull out that might really resonate with who we're having conversation with. But I mean, we're an organization. It used to be, speaking about digital media and agriculture
Mm-hmm.
as the tools that we use to connect and build in community. But now it's really, it's about empowering our community to have agency in what our future will be. And we
Mm-hmm.
use, a number of tools to do that. So
Mm-hmm.
it's
Mm-hmm.
really about community agency.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's a really strong concept, that figuring out how to work that into like what is the structure of that, because then it means that you're a connector, right? You're a
Right.
catalyst, you're a
And
conduit,
something very different from digital media and agriculture. I mean, because then it brings, when we talk about community agency, it's like, well, how do you do that? And so then you can begin, talking about, telling the stories of our community and,
right.
and yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. The way you're doing it might change over time, but the thing you're doing is always going to be the same.
Right.
Yeah. That's exciting. Keep me posted.
All right.
I'm always interested in those one-liners. It's like a video game for me. I'm like, oh, let's do the one-liner.
They're tough though, too.
Yeah,
'Cause
they are.
yeah, they can be challenging.
Yeah. Kristen, did you have something you wanted to say?
I was just thinking about I think that language is so fluid in a way, right? And that, I mean, particularly for those of us that live in the world of craft, the word can mean so many different things. It can be co-opted by different genres, I guess. I can't find the word. But so it's interesting because I think, as I've been writing about Peters Valley for the last 11 years, whether it's looking at mission, values, vision, narratives for grants. I sort of like the inverted pyramid that Megan was talking about in terms of journalism, where it's like, okay, you might want to talk about the newsiest thing, and that the most important things really at the bottom, right? The thing that drives it. But when we're thinking about that one liner, we're like flipping it to a pyramid, right? Where we want to get people to want to go.
Well, it's kind of
right.
like,
And,
I'm thinking it's this,
right.
because the difference between journalism and promotional language or identity language, or as other people call branding and marketing, the difference between journalism and that stuff is you need people to remember you as an entity, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I was thinking that you're reminding them, like, you're like, here's who we are,
Mm-hmm.
and then here's all this stuff, and then like, whoa, it's gotten really complicated. And now I'm down here and I'm like, please join us.
Yeah, that's a good visual. but then again, you know, like what Brandy was saying about the organization and having to change it, it's like, um, I think it's because as you get deeper into what you're doing, you understand it a little bit better. And that going through that, you know it in your heart. You know, sometimes my treasurer will say to me, Kristen, you know these numbers, you embody them, but it's got to be presented in percentages, or for example. And I'm like, huh, why? Like, don't you get but it's like we embody, like we know what we do, and yet we struggle to synthesize that. And that exercise of synthesizing and getting to the essence of it is really a process. And so I think your tool's very good to prompt that. And it's obviously a variation of the other planning tools that you've shared with us, in the sense that it just cuts to the chase.
Yeah, there's another element which I think everybody here would relate to. You don't have to have been like a founder of an organization to feel this, which is you have your own thing that you brought to this equation, right? And I'm bringing it up mostly because of like SIP culture. The idea of production is really like, that was like the genesis, because of the work that you do and because of the work that Carlton does, and like this like thinking about what is production, because we're producers. And then you extrapolate it out into that, like agricultural production, digital production, like all of those things, to kind of like synthesize and help it make sense to the outside world. But sometimes that Venn diagram of like your thing, whatever your thing is, and the thing you're trying to do out in the world, that Venn diagram, it can seem like, oh, now we've got to like position it in a way that it makes sense, but it's actually like a sweet spot of unique quality. So, for example, I'm like, I adore like graphic design. I adore public narrative, and I adore advertising because I grew up in a culture of advertising. And I saw it as a place where that was where the creatives were telling the public story. So I'm also like really motivated by social justice. I'm also really motivated by like fairness. I'm also all these things. And for a long time, I was like, how do we, like, how do those two worlds go together? Because the work that was done in that advertising world is so, like, has been, like you said, Kristen, like co-opted to the point where like the human story of beauty and power and like goodness has been like totally taken in this like horrible direction. How do I even make sense of that? But then I really saw that the overlap was where that was my unique contribution to the world. And I see that with everything that you all are doing. And specifically at SIP culture, just like the idea of production is the thing that calls you all to do your work, and organizing and support and like culture, right? And like never needing to be like, well, we've got to like position it a different way because people won't understand that. It's got to be a both and scenario. Like you have to be able to talk about agency from a really deep perspective of like, this is what, how I'm going to affect agency. And as an organization. So it's definitely synthesizing. And I find that Venn diagram is one way to get to the core. So it's not just about synthesizing in a vacuum based on what other people need to hear, but synthesizing in a way that's true to your heart and your story and what calls you to do your work.
I also like what Megan wrote in the chat. I thought that was really interesting.
Mm-hmm. So it's not simple, especially when you have multiple people weighing in. Yeah, we talked about this last week. And then layer in the complexity that language and the idea of perfection can uphold white supremacy culture. Yeah. So I think that there's like, this reminds me that you need to get some eyes on what you are writing. And that is not the same as group editing. There still needs to be like an editor in chief, and then getting like people's buy-in or getting people's like opinion, both. Like you need to do both. You should never just write something and like put it out with somebody else reading it as on behalf of an organization. And thinking about who's actually in your pool of people that you're asking, that can really remind you of like, am I surrounded by people that have my same experience and look like me, or am I actually asking lots of different people from lots of different experiences what they are reading here, and am I giving myself enough time to absorb that information, process it, and then apply it to that structure? And I try to not do that until I got the core. Like you said, Megan, like once you know what you're talking about, then then start asking out, and because it can really derail you if you're trying to like write. I mean, oh my gosh, I mean, many of us have been through this process where there's like a committee writing a mission statement. And it's just like that never ends well.
Sometimes it's it's a little bit of the grown zone you have to go through. It's a little bit of getting consent. If you don't go through that process, I think you just have to embrace that by collaborating in that and knowing that there's going to be some oppositional thinking that's going to come in and challenge. And it's cumbersome, but I think that discussion ultimately, I mean, one way that it has worked with good facilitation is that you're going to go through that process. It's going to be a little bit messy. You're going to distill it. And then one person's going to come up with, 3 versions based on that.
Yeah.
Coded on. So there's a way to clean.
I think it's like what you just said, the key word you said is facilitated. And like, if the presumption is that a bunch of people can sit down and actually put words in order, in a way that will work for everybody, I think that is like a dangerous like presumption to make. There has to still be a facilitation process.
Or an agreement.
Or an agreement to spend 12 hours like doing it if you want to do that. And sometimes the best stuff, I mean, I have found like specifically, I think as an example with Peters Valley, what I find most helpful is when there's some sort of pushback, but it's not about like wordsmithing the pushback. It's like the pushback is like, I'm not hearing this, and it's our job, of course, like you and me, Kristen, to like interpret what the pushback is actually saying, not that they're saying like, replace this word with this. It's our job to say like, oh, they're not hearing like some idea in here. Like, how do we keep what we had, what we're trying to say? And maybe we're made aware of something that's totally like we were blindsided by, or we were myopically like too focused on because we're not thinking like another, like they would think or whatever.
Yeah, there's I'm gonna just cut and paste something that I came across. I get this brain food newsletter, and there's this book on integrative thinking, and I just thought that it was, did I send it? I put it in there. I thought that was very useful in this particular moment.
Yeah, this is good. Integrative thinkers don't break a problem into independent pieces and work on each piece separately. They keep the entire problem firmly in mind while working on its individual parts. One of the keys to integrative thinking is the mindset that conflicting ideas, styles, and approaches are desired, not feared.
So I really like that, because I think about, even like what Brandy, I don't know that much about subculture, but if it's about digital production and also agriculture, obviously there's going to be times when you're talking about things that are like apples and oranges, right? Or apples and pickles. And how do you bring them together? And I think about, the American Craft Council, there's a library, there's a magazine, there's a marketplace, there's a community. Peters Valley, we have a gallery, we have a craft fair, we have an education program, we have a historic campus, like all these different things that we do. And so each person in charge of each of those areas is like one of the problems we're trying to solve. And then collectively, like if you're leading this, you're sort of needing to keep the big picture, but you have to have, everybody's got to be thinking about the big picture as well.
Yeah.
Right? So
how do you do that? Like Megan just put into the chat, the shorter way that you've thought about this is two truths can be true at the same time, which is like our own ability to accept that. But often we're also in the mode where we're having to help people that are not that kind of thinker, like aren't thinking integratedly. Like, how do you do that without being totally derailed on your like content development?
Well, I was even thinking that this is not unlike being in a boardroom, right? Where you're inviting in different perspectives, because there is going to, you want a little bit of tension so that you can arrive at the best solution, right? If everybody's nodding your head and nobody's questioning anything, are you really asking the right questions? So I think is how do you work through that? I think that's communication.
Yeah.
Well, I think that it's sometimes you say to us, yes, and,
Yes, and I
you
do say that.
And like Megan, two truths, can be, I think understanding that it's not about being right.
So how do you help other people through that process? Like anybody here? Because I think that that's the word facilitation came to mind. Like when you said that, Kristen, I was like, yeah, this is like hard because you have to be like working on your own narrative and you have to be facilitating a cultural, sometimes a shift in your own. When you talk about a board meeting, it's not just about an objective end result. You, as organizations that are dedicated to making the world a better place, you have to also lead that board meeting with everybody like, yeah, we're on the same page. And there's that's not like, there's often times when we have in the past left board meetings, I'm going to use that as the continuing metaphor, where we know people are not on that same page, and it's going to make it harder to transmit the core message because they didn't buy into that. And then what do we do?
But I think that sometimes you're going to leave not resolved, but with a commitment to exploration to get to the resolve. And I think that kind of setting the ground rules that, okay, we're going to talk about this problem and we may not solve it. And sometimes there are people like, okay, we want to get to the solution. And I don't know, sometimes I say, okay, let's understand that we're not there yet. We didn't arrive there, and that we need to do a little bit more work and move forward. And I mean, just recently, Brianne and I were working on a project, and we were getting a lot of pushback from my executive committee, and it was that groan zone, right? We were in that place of trying to solve something and have criteria and have everything, certain criteria established, and that hadn't been established. Like, we have this great idea, we're like, let us go out the gate with it, and it's like, but wait a minute, but what about, and that process is actually good. Because then you have to define it, and then it helps you own it, and it helps you, like, I guess.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I think in those situations, I would encourage the call to action to be a commitment that we are going to explore more, and that the in-between communication, that we aren't going to pick apart that communication that might happen externally in between, because you still have to keep going, you still have to keep working. And so it's that whole idea of like, and I like the idea, Megan, you wrote down about values, like what is our power, what is our responsibility. But I think that there's also another level where if you are trying to coordinate a lot of different opinions and facilitate an exploration, that if you're the facilitator, it might behoove you to make the call to action be, okay, we're going to keep exploring, and we're going to like support the staff as they have to like get word out about this now, even though we haven't figured it out yet. And that's just the pure like communication wordsmithy thing, is like asking people that have not bought into that are not on the same page to let that page go while the exploration is being done, or to commit to figuring it out like then and there. Because I think that those are the times when people can continue to like, sometimes passively aggressively, but sometimes just like chaotically like keep things from moving forward. And you have to do both.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's a really good moment of like human interaction, which is just like, we don't have the answer. And we're not, especially for staff with the board, not everybody here has like a board that is like that involved. Like some people are just like doing their thing and their boards are like, whatever. But some people have very engaged in boards that are really, thinking through stuff, but they're still not there at the front lines as the staff are there. So sometimes it's a really good human communication moment to be like, all right, we're acknowledging these things that we're still exploring. And we're also, as the leader, you may be needing to say like, and I'm asking you to like commit to making it as easy as possible to work through this exploration.
Right.
And that kind of is a pause moment of like, oh yeah, we're all in this together, which I find can be one of the most challenging things about core messaging, is that people are second guessing themselves because they're worried about how things might sound to others, or that people might not agree with something. And it's living, just like Brandy, you were saying, like the messaging is living. It's like, you got to look at it and keep it going. Other things that people are working on this week related to communication or this, I mean, we've talked about keeping messaging clear, but I think we're also talking here about like, how do we navigate the complexities of communication in these challenging times? Anything in specific that anybody's working through right now? All right. Well, as I started our session saying, like, things are good, but I'm also kind of like, I'm feeling a little bit of a need to like regroup. So next week, I'm actually gonna regroup. I'm gonna go into my summer retreat mode to get ready for next year, the rest of this year. So I'm not gonna be hosting Wednesday morning next week. But tomorrow afternoon at 1, we're doing a follow-up to the embodying anti-racism in communication and action conversation at 1. And depending on what comes out of that, we may continue to do those weekly. But then the following week, what's that, the 7th, 6th or 7th, we'll resume, and we will keep our communication support group alive and well. And in the meantime, I won't be doing too much email while I'm on retreat, but if you have something that comes up, please do not hesitate to email me. Because those responding to questions by email and keeping it flowing are not only pretty easy to do, but that's how we make sure we don't like get behind with each other. All righty. Great. Well, I hope you all have a really good week and a holiday, and think about independence, what the heck that means in this culture. And I'm so happy to like always be joined each week by really good people that are still trying to do the best that we all can, given everything that's going on. All righty. I'll see you soon. Bye.